Star Wars 7x7, episode 2411. We're back to our Mando Memos series, and we don't learn anything new about the client directly in Season 2 of The Mandalorian, but the things that we do learn during Season 2 put him in a new light. Punch it. Hey Rebel Rouser, I'm Alan Voivod, and this is Star Wars 7x7, your daily dose of Star Wars joy, and thank you so much for joining me for it. So, the client, played by Werner Herzog in Season 1 of The Mandalorian, we meet him in the very first episode, which is either the pilot or The Mandalorian, or Chapter 1 if you prefer, also Chapter 3, The Sin, and also Chapter 7, and that's The Reckoning, where, spoiler alert, he ultimately meets his demise. And so I've been thinking about him because I have to say I was disappointed in losing him. I find Werner Herzog to be a rather compelling personality, and I think that he brought some of that to his character, the client. I was hoping for more, but be that as it may. When the junior novel for The Mandalorian came out, I was like, oh, maybe we'll get to learn something more about the client. That's great. And unfortunately, no, we do not. It doesn't have any new information about the client. But in Season 2, we learn about the Imperial facility on Navarro, and that struck me as being rather interesting for a couple of reasons. First of all the troopers that we see at that facility are in pristine white uniforms, and that was utterly different from the stormtroopers that we saw guarding the client. All of their stormtrooper armor was grimy, was dirty, was unkempt, and so, it makes it kind of clear that those stormtroopers actually had nothing to do with the stormtroopers that were in that Imperial research facility that we saw in Chapter 12, The Siege. And speaking of The Siege, it's fascinating that this seems to be new information, that Greef Karga only recently learned of the facility's existence. I mean, if you think back to the third episode, The Sin, when Din goes to meet with Greef Karga and get his next job, and he's feeling off and won't go to the Twi'lek healing baths. He won't take a Camtono of spice with him on his next job or anything like that. But the Mandalorian wants to know what the Empire is doing there. So it's not common knowledge that the Empire is even on Navarro to begin with. And Greef Karga's response is that, just the Empire, it's just, the occasional mercenary and warlord, and that's it. So he is not expecting there to be any sort of organized presence on Navarro like the Imperial facility that we see in Season 2. But I do believe that Werner Herzog's character, the client, knows about that facility because he tells Dr. Pershing in The Sin in Chapter 3 to extract the material and get out of there because he can no longer guarantee Dr. Pershing's safety. And so that suggests, number one, that through whatever the client's intelligence network is, that he knows the Mandalorian has not left the planet, which may not be a very good thing. And it's been established that Moff Gideon has spies on Navarro, right? We saw that happen in Chapter 12 as well. And even though it was just a hologram appearance, I think we can safely say that Dr. Pershing was working at that Imperial facility, so that does suggest that the client had some knowledge about it as well. And so maybe the whole thing about needing to get Dr. Pershing out of there, and the fact that the Imperial presence isn't very well known on Navarro in Season 1 suggests that anything that they're doing with getting Pershing back and forth is happening under cover of darkness. But back to the client, we pretty well established that the client is operating in secret and as a front operation for Moff Gideon, and he is reporting to Moff Gideon, as is established in Chapter 7, The Reckoning, when Moff Gideon calls and the client has to tell Cara Dune and Greef Karga and the Mandalorian, I hope you don't find me rude, but I have to take this call. And then, his response to Moff Gideon is, yes, I have the baby, I have him. Clearly it's established that the client is reporting to Moff Gideon, and so is just, one tool within Moff Gideon's overall arsenal. So he may well have been some sort of imperial dignitary in the past. Certainly he has that medal that he's very proud of wearing. But now he is operating secret, operating as a frontman for Moff Gideon, and is easily disposed of. And the stormtroopers that he's working with are not the best of the best. They are not representing the Empire very well at all, and they seem to be operating as much under cover of darkness and with such a low profile as possible that not even Grief Karga really realizes or pays attention to their presence on the planet until things go bad. So as much as I had hoped that we might find out more about the client's role and that he might have had a more significant role in the proceedings, even in death we might have learned more, because that does happen from time to time. Unfortunately, it doesn't seem to be the case. It seems that he is just someone who was advancing our plot along. And so I think that becomes much more apparent by what we saw of the Empire on Navarro in Season 2. It certainly puts him and his actions and activities into a broader perspective in that regard. But if you think the client had a more important role to play, if you think that his influence might still continue to be felt in The Mandalorian in Season 3 and beyond, I'd love to hear your thoughts. So chime in wherever you find a comment section for wherever you're catching this episode, or at home base for the show at sw7x7.com. And that is going to do it for today's episode of the show. I hope that you take a moment to share it with family and friends that love Star Wars, if that's something you feel comfortable doing. And it just remains for me to say thank you so much for joining me for this episode, as always. And may the Force be with you wherever in the world you may be.
7x7 is not endorsed or sponsored yet by Lucasfilm Limited, Disney, or 20th Century Fox, and is intended for entertainment and information purposes only. Star Wars, the Star Wars logo, all names and pictures of Star Wars characters, vehicles, and any other Star Wars-related items are registered trademarks and/or copyrights of Lucasfilm Limited, or their respective trademark and copyright holders. May the Force be with them. All original content is copyright 2021 by Star Wars 7x7. We hope you love it.